Welcome back to another episode of The First Team. I am no longer dying from the sickness that I caught in Indianapolis. I'm Joe DeLeone. Joining me as always, NFL Draft Analyst, my good friend Ryan Roberts. Today we're moving on to our next position group rankings episode. We're going to be doing linebackers today for the 2024 NFL Draft. Not a very exciting linebacker group. You tweeted about this. You texted me about this, Ryan.
Yep.
It is a really bad linebacker class. And the funny thing is, in the past couple of drafts, we've had good linebackers and decent classes, but they've gotten pushed down draft boards really aggressively. I don't know what's going to happen this year. I don't know if there's going to be some overdraft on some bad players. I don't know if we have a crazy historic year where like 7 guys is the most that get picked in the top 200 picks. I don't know. This is going to be a really weird year for the 2024 NFL Draft.
Well, I would say this, Joe, is it doesn't have much depth, and it makes up for it by not having a lot of top end talent either. So it's just not a great class, man. I mean, look, there's value to be found in this class, and there's a few guys that I really like in this class, especially when it pertains to what the consensus believe, right? I might be higher on a couple players comparative to what I've seen kind of just generally out there in at least the media perception of these players and some of the NFL grades that we've gotten on these players in the past. But, we'll work through it, but it's not a great class. And I think that the one thing that I would like to put out there just kind of for some context is there are still a couple guys I haven't gotten to that I want to get to before the class ends. I mean, like Jordan McGee from Temple's a kid that I know you watched.
I didn't get to him.
I didn't get a chance. You watched him in the summer, though, right? If I remember correctly, like you peeked him in the summer, I think.
I would assume that he didn't improve very much if we haven't really talked about him. But he's a great athlete. He's a very explosive athlete.
So, but he's one, and then I haven't finished like Steel Chambers out of Ohio State, and there's just a couple guys miscellaneously out there. But we're talking about guys that sound more like depth of this class than like frontline guys, right? So, I mean, I'll say this. I don't know how many you have end up having, but as of today, again, a couple guys to finish, but I only have 10 draftable linebackers in this class. And there's a couple that we'll talk about today that like they are very borderline draftable players for me, right? So there's just not a great class right now, man. It's really not. It's kind of missing a star power up top, and the depth is not great either. It's not.
I'd probably have like 12 to 13, and
Okay.
maybe that's just because I'm being a little generous. I'm going to kick us off though with the way that we usually do this. I'm going to share my 10 through 6 for the class. Starting off at number 10, I have Trevin Wallace from Kentucky. Number 9, this is going to piss off all the Clemson Jeremiah Trotter lovers. Okay. Jeremiah Trotter is number 9 for me from Clemson. Number 8 is Maris Loifow from Notre Dame.
Yeah, Maris up there, huh? That's interesting. Oh man, sorry to cut you off.
Did he not make yours? He didn't make yours?
He actually I haven't finished him yet. So that's one of the other guys that's kind of like miscellaneous in the universe. But sorry, finish your list.
I mean, he's a big athlete, so that's kind of why he ended up on my board. Number 7, Tommy Ikenberg from Ohio State. Number 6 is Tyrese Knight from UTEP. Those are my last ones. BetOnline remains your top spot for all of your live betting action and contests. NFL, college football, UFC, NHL are all in full swing. BetOnline is your number one source for wagering news, odds, trends, and predictions with both desktop and mobile access at any time. Head to BetOnline today and use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for 50% off your first deposit. That is a 50% welcome bonus. BetOnline, where the game starts.
Okay. Well, I want to start with Marist, I guess, since I already kind of jumped the gun there a little bit. Joe, I want to buy into the athlete so bad, man, because he is 6'2 plus, 235, 239, I think is what he actually weighed into the Senior Bowl. He dropped weight a little bit to run, but 34-inch arms. I had a scout that compared him to Frankie Louvu, who just got a nice little deal in free agency from the Carolina Panthers to the Washington Commanders. Like, he's a very intriguing kind of movable chess piece. He just kind of has the same thing that a lot of the linebackers have in this class. He just doesn't know what the heck he's looking at all the time. Man. Like,
he's pretty aimless. He's pretty aimless, and that's kind of why he makes my top 10. Where I'm going to be honest with you here, and this is probably the least confident I've ever sounded on the show. There's a lot of dart throwing here. This a lot of just like, sure. There's one guy in here that instinctually is actually really good, but is just not a very good athlete, and he's
Yep.
not going to be a 3 down player in Tommy Ikenberg. All right, who's your 10 through 6?
10 through 6. Number 10, I have Curtis Jacobs from Penn State. Number 9, I have Tommy Ikenberg from Ohio State. 8, I have Jalen Ford out of Texas. Number
Oh
7,
wow.
Tyron Hopper from Missouri. And then number 6, I have Jeremiah Trotter Jr.
Oh, I'm a lot lower on Trotter Jr. than
Jo-
you are.
Joe,
Wow.
Joe, Joe,
Wow, you're a
I have a,
Trotter
I have,
lover over
I
here.
have a late 5th round grade on Jeremiah Trotter Jr., but he's my 6th ranked linebacker. To put that in the context of this class again, man, it's not a
That's
good class.
that's that's interesting because I have the same grade on him. I guess that I'm a little higher on a couple of those middle of
I'm
the
very,
pack guys.
I'm very picky at linebackers, man. We have discussed this over the years. I'm very picky on the second level, very, very picky, and I usually do pretty well on the second level. So you might want to get your notepad out and take a couple notes here, man.
I'm
Let's
gonna
get
I'm gonna
going here.
pass. To address Jeremiah Trotter Jr. before I get into my
Yes.
top five. Um, I really don't care. I think that anyone who likes this kid does not know what they're looking at. I really don't think that anyone who is super high on him and says this is a top 150 or better. Actually, sorry, let me be a little more aggressive. There are folks that
Yep.
claim that this is the top linebacker, that say he's top 100 or better. He is none of those things. He tested well on the bench. That was about it. He didn't do any other athletic testing for a reason because he is
Yes.
very clearly not a very good athlete. He is undersized. The play
Yep.
strength that he had in the bench reps does not show up on tape often, and his instincts aren't even that good. This isn't even a guy that makes up for a lack of athleticism and length and size like Tommy Eichenberg.
Yep.
Tommy Eichenberg's at least big, at least I know that he's got the,
It's
the
got big meaty
frame to play
claws, man.
Mike
Yeah.
and to play 2 downs. I don't know what Jeremiah Trotter is going to do in the NFL. I have legitimately no idea what that guy is supposed to do. And he is the perfect example of somebody whose stats were pretty good and decent,
Yeah.
but
Yep.
nobody wants to really acknowledge that he ended up being the right place at the right time a lot.
I think the Tommy Eichenberg, Jeremiah Trotter Jr. comparison's very interesting because, again, I had a 5th round grade on Jeremiah Trotter Jr. I have a 6th round grade on Tommy Eichenberg. So, like, we're not far off there, right? I would agree that Tommy's a little bigger, play strength's a little bit more functional. I do think, though, that instincts in zone coverage favor Trotter, though. I do think that's right. Like, I don't
Yeah,
think that he's the
yeah.
most flexible athlete in terms of playing man coverage, but I think as a zone spotter, he has had some propensity to be able to get into passing lanes and to intercept passes and to break up passes. I just think Tommy brings nothing to the passing game, like zero. And
Yeah. Yeah.
Tommy was good as a blitzer at Ohio State, but I don't think it's translatable at all to the NFL. Like, I just really don't. I actually think that Jeremiah Trotter as a blitzer is more translatable to the next level because at least he's slippery. Tommy's just beating dudes to the spot on the college level because he's a better processor than offensive lineman that he's facing against in pass pro. But I just don't think that that is going to overall be translatable. So again, not high on Jeremiah Trotter Jr. I am just the 6th guy in what I deem to be a very bad linebacker class, like very, very bad.
Number 5 to start us off
Yes.
here with our top 5. Cedric Gray from UNC is my number 5
Yep.
guy. Very long, lean, great, explosive, great long speed, tracks the football very, very quickly. Is one of those guys that closes down very well. I am in love with the way that Cedric Gray plays in coverage. I think that he's a very good instinctual coverage player because he moves well in space, and he's got a lot of film of him making disruptions on passes. I think that this is an every down linebacker. Now, as we're going to
Ooh.
say with a lot of these guys, instincts aren't always there. The instincts don't always really click, and he makes a lot of guesses and mistakes when he is deciding. But I've got a late third on him, and I think that
Yeah.
Cedric Gray is somebody that you grab at the end of day 2 and could be a starting linebacker on your defense.
We're not too far off on this one, Joe. I have a 4th round grade on Cedric Gray. I don't dislike Cedric Gray. He's not my type personally, right? Like, my type, because over the years, who have I gravitated towards? I've gravitated towards the Nick Boltons of the world, the incredibly good processors, the Leo Chenals of the world, a little bit of a different body type, but similar vibe as far as being able to instinctually understand and get to spots in a cohesive manner. I just think that Cedric Gray, because I agree with you, he's plus in the pass game. I think that he has good pass instincts. I think that he's incredibly explosive downhill. Like, when he reads a gap correctly and gets downhill, He's explosive. He's fast. He can make tackles for loss because he is a very, very good athlete. But one, not only is my guy in the wrong spot a lot because his eyes just kind of stink, to be honest,
Yeah.
his hands also aren't very good either. Like, I think he has some shock in his lower half, and I think his hands have some shock in him as well. But he just his aiming points stink, taking on blocks. I don't think he's incredibly aggressive to get off of blocks consistently. Like, I just a lot of to be I I like him a lot more in pursuit in the run game because he can just run and be an athlete. When he has to play on the front side of runs or stack from the inside from a middle linebacker position, I just think the instincts aren't there to take on blocks and successfully weave through traffic a ton. So but I also have at number 5. I also have at number 5
Oh,
because
okay.
again, in pursuit, athletic, pass game upside, 4th round grade on him. I don't dislike Cedric Gray necessarily. I just think that unfortunately with a couple of these guys, he's getting pushed up boards a little bit high because he is one of the athletic guys that you can hopefully build upon in a really bad linebacker class. Like, that's just kind of my thoughts on Cedric.
Okay, so since we share a 5 here in this class, a guy that you already mentioned is my number 4.
Okay.
Tyron Hopper from Missouri, 6'2", 221 was what he was listed at. I'm a really big Tyron Hopper fan. Now, he's not the biggest linebacker, but I love the close down speed. And I actually think his eyes and his instincts are pretty good. I think that he is a quick trigger type of a guy that could be a really good will backer or outside linebacker in the NFL. Does, again, need to add a little bit more to his frame. I also was really impressed by how willing and able he is to take on blockers. So, like,
Yeah.
despite him not being super big, he's still willing to go to war and fight things out with offensive linemen to track down the football and make plays on the ball. I just think Tyron Hopper, and I forget what his testing numbers were. I'm going to pull it up in a second, but
Did he
for who
test?
he,
I
I
feel
don't
like he
think
didn't
he
test.
did.
Could be wrong. Yeah.
I don't think he did, but I just love who he is as an athlete, and I think a guy like that
Yep.
is somewhat moldable in the NFL and could turn out to be a really good player. Yeah, he didn't test.
So my thing, so the one good thing is that Hopper weighed in at 231 pounds because that was
That's a great number for him.
one of my biggest criticism of him on film was that I just thought he had a really slight frame. And do you agree with this? This is just my perspective on him. I think his play strength is kind of below average right now. Like, I don't think it's good. I think that he still needs to add mass to his frame, and it's good to see that he maybe did a little bit, but he just needs a little bit more shock in his
Yeah.
paws and a little bit
Mhm.
of a firmer lower half, I think. Because here's a weird one, Joe. Sub 9-inch hands on him. I'm not making sense of that. I'm not saying that there's a negative to that. It's just kind
Yeah.
of just looking through some of these measurements. I just think that the power profile needs to come with the frame still. I think he's a good developmental day 3 player for me personally. Like, I would be willing to take him in the 4th to 5th round range, somewhere in that ballpark, and let him contribute on special teams, which I think he'll be very good at. And then hopefully you have a starting will linebacker in year 3, year 4. Like, hopefully that trajectory happens. I think the play strength was just something that kind of threw me off a little bit with Hopper.
You're
Number
number
four,
4. Yep.
number 4, a player that made your list but did not make your top 5. I have Tyrese Knight out of UTEP. He was a guy
I
that we
could have
talked
guessed that.
about. Late 3rd round grade. So again, I had Cedric Gray with the 4th round grade. I have a late 3rd on Tyrese Knight. I really like Tyrese Knight a lot, man. He is a guy that we had on the show, obviously, but he was a young man that I feel like I'm going to be higher on than just about every media member out there in this realm because he is just. I see so much of Dre Greenlaw in him, who is a great linebacker for the San Francisco 49ers. A little over 6 foot, not the tallest guy of all time, but he has plus length for his position, almost an 80-inch. Actually, I think he did have an 80-inch wingspan, so he has some legitimate length. And despite him not being the biggest linebacker of all time, I think there's legitimate pop in his lower half. Like, when he comes to balance in the run game, you feel him. And I think that his processing is mostly good, like solid to good, but there are some moments where I think he gets deceived with misdirection at times. But man, he has just a really good talent of understanding gap discipline, but also being able to understand how to manipulate that gap, get in the backfield. He also, I think, has plus instincts in the passing game as well. He can get into zones and drop, and he's had plenty of pass breakups for the last couple of years. I just think this kid's an ultra athletic second level defender that could play Mike in the modern sense. can play will, has plus athleticism, and he really brings a pop when he comes to balancing the run game. So I'm a big fan of this kid. I think by year 2, this is a starting will linebacker, and I wouldn't be shocked if a couple years down the line we're looking back on it and saying that might have been one of the biggest values in the 2024 NFL draft at linebacker, because you're probably going to get a starter in the 3rd or 4th round, maybe even to the 5th, depending on how the board falls.
The only pause I had on him is that I just thought that his instincts were really inconsistent, because I watched 2 games on him. In one game, I thought he was super quick trigger, downhill, making all these plays, and then when he was off, he was really off. Like, his instincts were just all over the place, and he was guessing, and he was filling the wrong gaps. And when he was filling the wrong gaps, he would left open some pretty massive rushing lanes. So that's the only reason why I'm a little careful on him. But I do see that potential that you're bringing up. Edgerrin Cooper is my number 3, Ryan, to jump in here for the next one. Man, if there's a guy in this class that pans out, ends up being a ridiculously gifted starting linebacker, that it could, for a scheme creative defensive coordinator, it is Edgerrin Cooper. This guy checks every box that you're looking for in a NFL linebacker. He flies all over the field. He finishes really, really well. He is just an explosive sideline to sideline athlete that is going to be able to cover a ton of space for you. But again, the cliche with a lot of these guys, his eyes are all over the place. This is not a guy that you could trust to make a consistent decision on every single given play, because he is, he's either going to track the ball down and attack downhill, or he is going to guess and go the complete opposite way. So there's a lot of carefulness that needs to be approached with somebody like Edgerrin Cooper, but I would take him somewhere on day 2.
I am terrified, Joe, that we have the same top 3. I'm absolutely
terrified.
I
think that we do.
I also have Edgerrin Cooper as my number 3 out of Texas A&M. He is a very abnormal body, because he's like Maris Loifau from Notre Dame, in the sense of he's about 6'2", a little over 6'2". He's about 235 pounds, but he's got 34-inch arms. Like, he is super long on the second level, man. But he ultimately, you know what you just said about Tyrese Knight, where it's like when he guesses right, it's really good. Well, unfortunately, Edgerrin Cooper is also a guesser, right? Like, there are just moments where you're just like, that guy had no idea what he was looking at. He just split a gap because he wanted to be right, hopefully. And the eyes are just very, very consistent. This kid terrifies me, to be honest. Like, there's some pause that I have with Edgerrin Cooper, but he's a freak show athlete. Like, with 34-inch arms, the kid can run. He's explosive, getting downhill. He can work sideline to sideline, and he's very quick as well. Like, he can change direction well, in my opinion, as well. So I like the athlete Edgerrin Cooper. I would also be willing to take him somewhere mid day 2. Like, I have a late second, early 3rd round grade on him. So I'm right in the middle of day 2. I like a lot of what he is, but I really hope whatever defensive coordinator drafts him, they kind of do what the Baltimore Ravens tend to do, of like, let's get these inside linebackers into attack mode and really get them downhill and kind of trigger them, self-trigger, without really reading and reacting, really try to get them downhill. Because if you get them in that system and develop the instincts properly, I think you have a plus starting linebacker in the NFL. But there is a little bit of a boomer bust quality, in my opinion, to Edgerrin Cooper.
He feels like a Baltimore Raven. Like, he feels like the
Doesn't
3rd
he?
round pick for their. Yeah, I feel like
Patrick Queen's a free agent, right? Isn't Patrick Queen a free agent? So,
I mean, talk about comparisons that kind of fit there, comparing him to Patrick Queen. That could be a 1-to-1 there. I don't think that we have the same top 3s. Number 2 for me is Junior Colson.
Okay. All right.
He's number 1 for you?
He is number 1 for me. Yes, I love Junior Colson. Yep.
Let's talk about Junior Colson.
Let's do it.
Thick-framed kid. Probably the most filled out linebacker of these top 5 guys that we're talking about. Like, he's really well put together, which is makes me feel good about him coming in and starting. I think that outside of Peyton Wilson, who is probably going to go later than I have him ranked because of other issues that we're going to talk about in a second.
Right.
He is probably the most ready to jump in and play right now out of any of these linebackers. He is somebody who I feel confident. If I draft at the beginning of day 2, the beginning of the 2nd round, I know that I'm getting a starting Mike linebacker that is going to plug right in and is going to be really freaking consistent. If there's a linebacker in this class, which this does not a lot of competition for this, that ends up being a defensive rookie of the year candidate, I think it could be Junior Colson, because he could rack up 1,000,000 tackles because he's super consistent. His reaction, his decision-making, his reactiveness is great. And he closes down really well. This is the prototype, I think, for the modern NFL's version of a Mike linebacker. And this is one of the few guys that I don't feel really gross about bringing up, because I think he's going to be a great linebacker in the NFL.
Linebacker 1, Junior Colson, 6'2+, 230 something pounds. He was listed at 247, but I think he got down to 239 for the combine.
Mm-hmm.
I have an early second round grade on him. I'm a big fan of Junior Colson. I remember watching him this past summer, Joe, because we watched him this summer, because I remember watching the Michigan defense, because they have, obviously a lot of talent on that defense. I mean, there are several players on that defensive line are going to get drafted just this year, right? Talking about Chris Jenkins, talking about Jalen Harrell, talking about Brady McGregor, and then obviously they have Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant next year. A lot of defensive line talent. But I remember watching, and I'm like, who the heck is 25? At that point, he was listed 6'2", 225. I'm like, who the heck is that kid? He is moving. And quietly, he's led Michigan in tackles 2 straight years for one of the best defenses in college football. And I feel like no one talked about that. It was the most bizarre thing of all time. But this is a young man that I love, because he is one of the few players. I'm looking at it right now. He might be the only player that I would classify this way. He can play Mike. He can play Will.
Yeah.
With his ability to work in pursuits. And I'll also think, if you are a heavy 4-3 base team that does play base a lot on early downs, especially, he could play Sam for you too, because he's got pretty good length and he's explosive and he can set a firm edge. I really like this football player, man. I think instincts are mostly good, right? There's momentary lapses, but he is a really good combination of physicality, strength, pursuit speed, and pretty good vision, right? All those things together, I think this is a plus starting linebacker in the NFL that can play a variety of roles on the second level. Big fan of this young man. That is probably the most underrated player in this class, but luckily, I think Daniel Jeremiah maybe had him as linebacker 1, somebody that's pretty plugged in had him as linebacker 1. I think that we have undervalued him as a collective, not me or you necessarily, because we both have him as a top 2 linebacker in this class. But nobody was talking about this kid early, and you need to start doing it right now, because that kid was quietly a stud on the inside of the defense.
Wait, before I speak on this, before I say what I'm about to say. Okay, so summer scouting, do you know who?
No.
Do you know who had
No
Junior Colson as linebacker 1 in summer scouting?
Wasn't he a linebacker 2 for me? He was high though, right? Was he?
He was linebacker 1 for me. Screw you.
Shut up.
I had him number 1 over Jamon Dumas Johnson. I had him number 1.
I love Jamon Dumas Johnson. Then he went back to school and transferred to Kentucky. I don't know what the heck happened there, but yeah.
Well, he got beat out. The kid I forget the kid's name that took over for him.
Freshman, right? CJ Allen.
That kid is going to be that kid's going to be a monster. That kid is unbelievable.
Yes,
we'll probably be talking about him in 2 years. My number 1, your number 2, Payton Wilson from NC State.
I don't have Payton Wilson number 2. I don't have him as number 2. Just kidding. All right, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Who are you gonna name? Steel Chambers? Is that who you're gonna?
Chambers, baby. JD Bertrand. JD Bertrand. What are you talking about, man?
Yeah. Okay. Good one. Payton Wilson though, at 6'4", 230-ish pounds, tests really well. Tremendously long, explosive athlete.
Well, he's not that long. He's not that long. He's tall. He's not that long.
Sorry, he's tall.
Yes.
Minus, and I'll let you kind of we've talked about this a lot. And actually, we don't even need to kind of rehash it, because we did it in the scouting report episode on him.
Yes.
Payton Wilson, without the medical issues, the serious medical issues, the injuries to shoulder, knee, all that stuff, would be, I think, a first-round pick. I think he would be good enough to go in the back end of the first round. He flies all over the field for a bigger linebacker that could play multiple roles, and I think is scheme diverse. I really do believe that Payton Wilson has everything that you're looking for in the modern NFL linebacker, and would be playing at a Pro Bowl, all-pro level. My biggest fear with him, and it's just so simple. How do I know that this guy isn't going to deteriorate and completely be out of the league in 3 years? And does he actually make it to his first contract? This is a completely different reason, but I think of who was the kid with the 49ers of 5 or so years ago?
Chris Borland.
Chris Borland comes to mind.
Yeah.
Retired for a completely different reason, but how do I know that Payton Wilson doesn't just get nagged with injuries in year 3 and say, you know what, I can't do this. My body just caught up to me.
Yeah. I mean, it is the risk here, and it's a legitimate thought because we're not talking about a kid that had like one shoulder injury. We have talking about a kid that has had multiple shoulder injuries that have cost him the end of seasons and on top of a ACL tear early on in his career, right? So the good news is I have heard that I believe the medicals actually passed, which is good. So like I haven't heard
Yeah,
any
but
negatives
but
on that, but yeah.
I'm not a doctor, okay? But
Oh, you're
which
not?
is a horrible
You're
way to
not?
start a sentence.
Breaking news, Joe's
But
not a doctor.
even if these things pass and everything looks good,
Right.
injuries are still injuries. Like I had a
Sure.
serious pec tear, and it's still, I still haven't really gotten it back up to like full strength, and it's something that bothers me from time to time when I do
Sure.
things athletically. I think just when you've got multiple deteriorating injuries, and you might get yes, this guy can play, and it probably won't really hold him back.
Right.
I just get so
I
afraid
get
with
that.
guys that have a ton of injuries.
I get that. I think the good thing is that but the medicals have gone so far now that we're doing things like DEXA scan to measure like bone density and stuff
Yeah.
like that. Like it's gotten really in depth. So I'm hopeful for it because Joe, 2 years ago, literally 2 years ago to this date, I think I brought up Peyton Wilson. I'm like, I have an early second round grade on Peyton Wilson. Like just at that point, because the kid is, you mentioned it, 6'4", 233 pounds. He lost weight to run fast, and lo and behold, he ran 4.43 at the combine. Like absolutely
Insane.
insane athlete, man. He is one of the rare dudes that he was a former 5-star and he can make plays in coverage. He can play in pursuit. He can probably be a modern Mike in today's system, but like I would rather him play Will, honestly. He reminds me a lot of, and I'm still mad at Daniel Jeremiah from NFL Network for taking my comp, but
Stealing your
Kiko
comp.
Alonso, man. Kiko Alonso is the player that I see every time because he's tall, super high cut, but just range for days on the second level. And when Kiko was on early on in his career, especially with Buffalo Bills, he was on, dude. He was a really good player. So I think Peyton Wilson is going to be a
And
plus
he
starting
also
linebacker.
deteriorated too. He was also one of those
He got
guys that
injured. He
deteriorated
got
very
injured.
quickly.
Yeah, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. He got hurt, and then he went to Philly, and then he just wasn't really the same guy anymore. But when it was early and he was healthy, he was a really good player. And I am positive that as long as Peyton Wilson is healthy early on in his career, he'll be a really good linebacker on the NFL level. How long it lasts? That's why just a little bit of a backtrack and a little bit of a let's take a step back. And that's why I ultimately do have Junior Colson, linebacker 1, over Peyton. But Peyton is going to be a really good player. Just the question of how long does he last on the NFL level, which
Yeah.
is a very reasonable conversation to have.
Well, that's going to wrap us up, folks. Thanks for tuning in. Drop a comment below, hit that subscribe button, and we're going to be back with interior offensive line as our next show. Thank God we're combining that into one show. Otherwise, that would probably be one of the worst, most unentertaining weeks of my life trying to watch centers and guards. But we'll be back with more at Joe DeLeone, at Rise and Draft. Enjoy the rest of your week.